Is it better to be feared or respected? And I say, is it too much to ask for both? With that in mind, I humbly present the crown jewel of Stark Industries' Freedom Line. It's the first missile system to incorporate our proprietary repulsor technology. They say the best weapon is one you never have to fire. I respectfully disagree. I prefer the weapon you only have to fire once. That's how Dad did it. That's how America does it. And it's worked out pretty well so far.
Do you expect me to talk?
And welcome to episode 119 of Do You Expect Us to Talk? I'm your host Becca, and as always, joined by my lovely co-hosts Chris and Dave. How are you both doing?
Feeling very, very lovely, thank you, Becca.
Feeling marvellous.
Oh.
So what you did there?
Yeah. I don't know how I'm going to manage that with DC down the line. Feeling detective comic-y.
I've got an important message. This is it. I detect sarcasm.
I detect comic books
somewhere along the line.
Well, obviously Marvel started off as timely comics as well.
They were.
This show very timely.
Which is very timely indeed. All the puns.
Good evening, folks.
Are you gentlemen ready to step into a part of a larger universe?
Yes. You just don't know it yet. Yeah, this is the biggest series we've done since Bond, by a distance.
It's still going. Obviously, Bond is, but
is this now beat Bond? Because it will do what?
No, Avengers 4 will be the 22nd.
Right. Okay.
So obviously Spider-Man, but I think Black Panther may be next year as well. Certainly Spider-Man: Far From Home, what we believe it to be called, is next year as well. That will be, I think, the 23rd. So they'll probably pass Bond late next year, match Bond late next year and pass the following. Well, no, Bond 25 is next year. I think Marvel will hit its 25th film the year after.
Okay, so we got.
Yeah.
So what Avengers 4 will be the 23rd?
22nd.
22nd.
I need to look at it actually. We did plan this out. We said. In a very recent episode, we haven't planned this out. We have now, but I've got to call it up because I've got to remember what the hell I said now. Okay, so now a lot of how this series goes depends on how quickly we get through it. So whatever life throws in our way, a few other things we want to do, like we're doing a Superman commentary later in the year. But if you were to count to the end of Avengers 4, so the end of Phase 3, that would set up a 28-episode series. So you have Phase 1, which is 6 films. That takes you from tonight's film through to the Avengers. Our 7th episode would be a commentary on one of the Phase 1 films. That will be my choice because I'm the next one to choose a commentary. It brings us back round to my Bond commentary being a choice after we finish, but I'll choose a commentary from that phase. Then you've got 6 more films. You have Iron Man 3 through to Ant-Man. And then there'll be a second phase commentary, which will be the 14th episode, and that will be Becca's choice. Oh. Then we have Captain America Civil War through to, now, definitely Ant-Man and the Wasp, because that will be out on home release later this year. And that will bring up a phase 3 commentary that will be Chris's choice. Then Charlie Brigden will join us for a Music of the Marvel Cinematic Universe episode. Then we're going to do a second Phase 3 commentary, which will either be a consensus choice. Either the three of us will just say, let's do that one, or we may put it out to the vote. We don't know yet. And this is where we're a little bit unsure about timings, because we've still then got Captain Marvel, the fourth Avengers film, which are the 26th and 27th episode, and then a final rankings episode. We will not do a final rankings episode until the fourth Avengers film is released. So our rankings will incorporate the first three phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the 22 films we've just talked about. So in terms of when they fall, it will depend on timings. In terms of breaks, it will depend on how we feel. We will definitely do the first two phases. So we are definitely in through to the end of phase 2 with Ant-Man and the phase 2 commentary. If we reserve the right to take a break there. If we're enjoying it, we'll keep going, and we'll keep going until we run out of films. And then, like I say, final rankings will come after the fourth Avengers film. Whether or not Spider-Man is out on cinematic release by that point. And then I think in the future we will group Marvel films and maybe revisit it once a year and do 2 or 3 episodes. That is the plan. So that is the biggest series since Bond. We did 37 Bond films, or 37 Bond episodes in our original run there. And I think our longest series after that was Star Trek at something like 19. So yeah, our second largest series ever. And I dare say, with the current sort of popularity of things, probably I'd be very surprised if this wasn't a very popular series.
Well, yeah, I think we find it easy to do like a lot of these episodes. It won't be like Star Trek where we just end up like, oh fucking hell, because the quality is reasonably consistent and they do vary from film to film. You know, it's,
I don't think there hasn't really been a dud as such, has there? I mean, there's a couple.
There's a few, but
there's a few ones like.
But it's
Hulk,
not
for
like,
example.
oh my god, that's fucking awful.
No, it wouldn't really dire.
Like, oh, that's a bit
Well, I think
average.
I mean, on the outset, I mean, we're going to be ranking these, so just a reminder to Chris and Becca, please rank these as you go along. I've got a skeleton ranking at the moment. Now, for example, at the outset, I wasn't overly in love with Doctor Strange, for example. That's not to say I won't like it this time. I've deliberately not picked one right at the bottom, but, you know, I've picked one where I was a bit like, dunno. But it didn't follow, it wasn't Doctor Strange 3. I didn't have like 2 Doctor Strange films before it, and then the following week, I've got to do another Doctor Strange episode. If I don't like Doctor Strange this time, well, the previous week I did Civil War, and the following week I'm doing Guardians of the Galaxy, then Spider-Man. So I think there's enough variation to keep you going. Whereas when we got to the Next Generation films in Star Trek, we had one bad film, and then the next week we had another bad film, you know, from the same crew. So I'm fairly confident we'll go through this in one hit, but we're not promising, because obviously James Bond is our thing. So we could have talked about that week after week for forever.
Yeah, I think we'll just go through it like troopers.
There will be a couple of breaks because in December we will do Superman, and I don't think we'll do that additional. I think we will take a 1 week break in our run to do that.
Oh, we've got Christmas commentary as well, haven't we?
And we got the Christmas commentary. We normally do that instead of, but last year, or the first year we did. The first year we did that as well as, so we kept our normal schedule and threw in a Christmas one as well. Last year I think we were all busy, so it went as part of our normal run. So we don't know this time, is what we're saying. There's also a Creed film out towards the end of the year, a Rocky film.
Shit, yeah, of course.
So
that'll be out January, we reckon, don't we? I don't think it's been...
Well, if you go by previous Rocky films, they'll get it in November, we'll get it in January. We may get it in November as well, but historically we've got it in January. If that is the case, I suspect we'll try and do a weekend of release-ish kind of review.
Like catch up.
Yeah, so we'll take the odd break here and there, but basically it's all Marvel all the time through to 2019 now.
Good stuff. I'm looking forward to this series.
You know what, I am as well. Even though I'm only familiar with it through many of the films and a very small number of the comics. But no, I am looking forward to the series.
I think it's been waiting to happen. It's been on the list since we started.
It has, and a few people have requested us to do it as well. So
they have, and I know a lot of people are looking forward to this. So,
thank you, dear
be
listeners.
aware, we really are as well. We're very, very excited about this.
Can't wait.
So, to start us off, Becca, what are we covering tonight?
Without further ado, we kick off our Marvel retrospective review series with Iron Man, starring Robert Downey Jr., Gwyneth Paltrow, Terrence Howard, Jeff Bridges, and many more, plus the voice of Paul Bettany. Written by Mark Fergus, Mark Hawksby, I can't spell those names, Alex Markham, Matt Holloway, and with characters created by Stan Lee, Don Heck, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby, with a score by Ramin Djawadi, directed by Jon Favreau, and released 2008. Oh my god, it's 10 years old, this film.
Well, we found that out when we got kicked out of Twitter for being 10. This is the film that made us Twitter renegades.
They locked us out because we were too young.
Ramin Djawadi also wrote the music for Game of Thrones. So the famous, particularly that opening score, which is opening theme, which is kind of iconic now, is a Ramin Djawadi.
It's one of the most famous ones. You know, it's become famous when The Simpsons do a parody.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I haven't seen actually. I can imagine it in my head though.
Okay. Springfield's like sort of going up like in like pop.
It does, yeah. It's really clever actually. But no, I do love like the theme. As you say, it's one of the most iconic TV themes ever. And it's really fitting for like sprawling fantasy epic.
I think as well because this score is very sort of rock and roll. This film's got the feeling of, it does have the feeling of a young upstart studio. It really does. It feels, I mean, there's nothing more establishment now than, the Marvel series. It's a license to print money. But this really wasn't the case. I mean, they started with Iron Man. They didn't start with, they nearly started with the Incredible Hulk, and that's next week's film, but they didn't start with Spider-Man, the Hulk, the X-Men, etc., because they didn't know them. Marvel Studios, Marvel as a company nearly went bust 20 or so years ago. I don't even know why that was. I don't know if that was bad investments, collapses in comic book market. I don't know. To keep themselves afloat, they sold off most of their famous characters. Spider-Man went to Sony.
X-Men was
Fox, as was the Fantastic Four. Hulk went to Universal. I believe, and I may be wrong, Iron Man was either Paramount or Universal. I can't remember. So even Iron Man was sold off at one point, but the rights did revert in time. But yeah, they kept themselves afloat, and then of course we get to the mid-2000s, and they decide they want to do it. They decide they want to go ahead, so they go to Merrill Lynch, a division of Bank of America, and get themselves a $525 million line of credit on a business plan that involved them creating a series of films. And they started with Iron Man because Iron Man was basically what they had. We'll see that with phase one just generally.
See, I always thought that it was more of a, let's just see if we can, because it, spoiler, the only real mention of expanding universe is like tagged on right at the very end. I mean, I didn't realise it, when it came out, was before we all had to stay and watch the end credits now for every fucking film. Because these days, like, fuck, is there something at the end? I fucking don't know anymore.
I wish Marvel would give me money for all the films I've sat through that didn't have one when I got to the end of it.
I mean, like, you made successful when there's actually apps, or like you can actually Google like whether there's actually something at the end or something or not.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll talk about it as we go through the film, but obviously there's mention of the Avengers. Well, the Avengers are extremely famous now, but I'd not heard of the Avengers. The Justice League were a lot more famous, the DC equivalent in popular culture, I would suggest. The caveat to that is we're not really comic book people, and the comic books I have read have tended to be DC, not because I'm a DC fanboy particularly, but I like Batman. So I've read a lot of sort of Batman trade paperbacks, and I've read a few Superman. I have read a couple of Hulks. I've read Hulk Grey and one or two other things. I've read Ultimate Spider-Man and a couple of other things. But largely speaking, we're going to critique things from the perspective of the films here. We're not going to talk about how it compares to the comic book Iron Man, except where we might have picked that information up. But I think it was an Easter egg. I don't think they were sure. I think it was an aspiration. But
it was like, we're going to go for it, but we reserve the right to kind of politely ignore it if it doesn't quite work out.
Well, we've got this film, and then a couple of months later, you've got the second film, and then there's a 2-year gap. And when it comes back, suddenly there's a ton of Avengers foreshadowing. Mm. So I think it's in that period they decided they were going to do it.
Yeah, because Iron Man was this film was actually a really big hit.
Relatively speaking, now, the funny thing is, I think if you'd been sat Christmas 2008 looking back on the movie year and saying, which was the comic book film of the year, I think most people would say The Dark Knight. Because The Dark Knight took over $1 billion at the box office when that was rarer than it is now. This took $585 million, which is still a sizable hit. But
that's quite remarkable back in the day.
But The Dark Knight was a bigger film, particularly in the United States. In fact, in the United States, it nearly took as much as Iron Man did worldwide. But I think over time, largely because most comic book films are Marvel, Iron Man has been far more influential in setting the tone. If you look at The Dark Knight, it's got more in common with something like X-Men, in that it's a comic book movie that wants to exist in the real world. Whereas the Marvel Cinematic Universe increasingly has embraced its comic book origins and allows them to dress like comic book characters and allows them to have the powers and stuff of real comic book characters. I think the sphere coming into this series was that I've got to go back in time to this now. We've now got Iron Man in the Avengers on another planet in a suit that forms around him. And, all that kind of thing. We've now got to go back to 2008, where it's a lot more real world. It's a lot smaller. It's a lot cheaper. Still a relatively expensive film, but, Marvel in Phase 1, and this is going to be my critique all the way through Phase 1, was slightly cheap. Before Disney bought them out, Kevin Feige, who we'll talk about in a minute, reported to a guy whose name I keep forgetting. It's something like Palmenter or I can't even remember.
Yeah, I've something because he was
involved
in Spider-Man as well. He was amongst different.
Yeah,
studios.
You're thinking of Avi Arad, but
Sorry.
I've got a fun fact about him later on.
But the point is, he was reporting to people who were constantly trying to drive costs down, whereas the taps have certainly been turned on a bit more these days. But that's a result of success as well. I think the other thing that makes this film feel like it's succeeding against the odds is, and we must talk about Kevin Feige before we get into the film, is the fact that Robert Downey Jr. is the lead. Now, Robert Downey Jr., as late as 2003, couldn't get insurance to be appearing in films because he had a severe drug habit, or historically had, and Marvel Studios, when Jon Favreau mentioned his name, said absolutely not. And they had to be convinced by a screen test. Well, they've got a limited line of credit, albeit it runs into the hundreds of millions. But that's going to fund 2 films, really, when you think about budgeting, marketing, and everything else. If he turns up on set, has a relapse, fucks the film, Marvel Studios are fucked. So the very fact that this studio had enough independence to put Robert Downey Jr. of 10 years ago, 12 years ago when he would have been cast, into this film is something that arguably, had this started as a Disney line, they might not have risked.
Yeah, I mean, it's a typical Hollywood thing where they don't like to take chances, but when you look at it, it makes absolute perfect sense to why you would cast Robert Downey Jr. in this role, largely because he's really good casting. He kind of really puts himself in the role. I mean, they're very much a parallel. You always get a sense of part of this character of Tony Stark is actually him. So I think he's really related to the role. But also, everyone really loves a comeback. As much as audiences like to see a guy fall, like to see someone sort of fall down and mock him and what have you. It's a nasty side. They do like to see the guy who or woman or whoever come back from.
There's a
much like
meta-narrative
Travolta with Pulp Fiction. It's like, oh shit, Travolta. He
I
was
think
doing
so.
Look Who's Talking Now. Now he's like in one of the coolest films in the year.
There's a meta-narrative of Tony Stark being on a redemption path here as well.
I mean,
but yeah,
everything about the theme of the film, it just makes sense in terms of the parallel with what's going on with Downey Jr. himself.
I agree. This could have been a very different film. There was talk. Let's say it was Universal. I don't need people to tell me we're wrong. In that I'm just picking
I
a
remember
studio.
Paramount when I watched it, but I don't.
Paramount did a part of the deal was Paramount their deal was up with the Avengers to distribute. I think may even have been Age of Ultron, but it was one. But Disney bought out the last couple, but allowed Paramount to keep the logo on it. But yeah, Paramount were the distributing partner to the sort of new studio, if you like. Kevin Feige, 2007, named as head of this studio, was going to be Avi Arad, who we know from producer credits on the Spider-Man films. Kevin Feige was 33 years of age, youngest studio head in decades, if not forever. They put together sort of a brains trust of 5 or 6 people just to sort of talk about keeping things close to the comics and getting the tone right. On that were people like Brian Michael Bendis, who's best known for probably his work on Spider-Man. He's just moved to DC, actually, and he's working on Superman comics at the moment. But there was him. There was I can't even remember without looking, but there was a period of time where they had Kevin around a group of people to keep him in check. That's not the case now. There's two people working with him, Luis Espinito, I think, and I can't remember the other name, but I will in future weeks because it will become relevant in future weeks. But he now reports direct to Disney, and it's fair to say he's barely made a misstep in 10 years.
Yeah, he's pretty much got a good record, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, Phase 1 is an interesting one because a couple of these films look a little cheap. This film's got relatively little action in it when you actually really think about it.
Yeah.
And also, there were a lot of problems with actors through this. People getting recast when I think they thought they were more important than they were. It's now become the state, a bit like Star Wars. The brand is the property is the brand, is the name, is the draw. It isn't about big actors. So obviously we see Terrence Howard tonight. We never see him again. Next week we're going to see Edward Norton, who is very, very respected in Hollywood, and never saw him again thereafter. I think Marvel were a mixture of cheap, but also they are a producer-led series where you fit in with the overall vision or you leave.
Yeah, I think they sort of like started as a means to go on because obviously they were taking chances, so they couldn't risk blowing a budget on something that wouldn't necessarily work. And I think they've kind of carried that, particularly when they have so many lead actors. It's hard to. I mean, there is a bit of awkwardness when they make exceptions for, say, Downey Jr., who did like start the franchise. You could say argue that they had to do it, but
they were careful where they spent their money.
Yeah.
You know, next week we're going to talk about it a lot more because Ed Norton got himself very involved in the creative process. I think thought he was a big important lead to what was happening, and they replaced him without thinking about it. Now I'm going to read you some quotes next week about what Kevin Feige said, what Norton said at the time, what he said a couple of years ago, you know, a bit later on. And Marvel arguably didn't get their PR right to start with, because certainly by 2009, 2010, well, even 2011, I started thinking of them as quite a parsimonious, mean-natured studio, and that's certainly not the case now. But I do remember Kevin Smith saying he bumped into Samuel L. Jackson, who we'll talk about a lot in future weeks, backstage at Comic-Con one year. And he said something to him about Marvel and looking forward to the Avengers or whatever it was. And Samuel L. Jackson said, no, man, Marvel really don't pay. I.e., they were very, very cheap at one stage. Robert Downey Jr. being the obvious exception, and we'll get to it.
This has kind of really brought him back, really, hasn't it, in terms of his career?
Yes,
well, not career, but it kind of it hasn't in parts. But I think it's kind of he definitely you can't look at his comeback and discount his involvement in the Marvel series.
You can't, though. I think the first film where I really thought he's back, and I don't think he's going to give anyone any more trouble, would be the Shane Black film Kiss Kiss Bang Bang from 2005.
Of course, yes.
He did a few things before that, like The Singing Detective and other things, but they were small little curios that arguably didn't do that well. But Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, for anyone listening, we're going to talk about this when we get to Iron Man 3, because that's a Shane Black film. Chris is a big Shane Black fan, and I'm a bit not so sure. I'm a bit on the fence about him. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is brilliant. Might even be his best.
That's a really good film. I must say I'm not a fan, but I really love that film. It's really good.
It's great. It's really great. And you've also got a very drunk Michelle Monaghan wandering around in some Christmas stuff, half naked, which would be lovely.
What's not to love?
What's not to love? But it's him and Val Kilmer, and they're both brilliant, isn't it?
And you play the game with like celebrity lookalikes.
So first, I think I'll just start with possibly, before we get into sort of first thoughts on the film itself, my reaction to it when it came out, my sort of hype for it. Marvel have consistently been, ever since this, very good at trailers, and they were here as well. There was, even despite Iron Man being like a C-list character at best, there was some hype around this. We were all looking forward to it. Lots of shots of Downey in the cave and with the arc reactor in his chest and stuff like that.
I think it was a buzz of like Downey's back, and like we need to watch. And plus also it's like a new comic book character that we've not seen, and there's a little bit of there was you can't deny that Downey has a mass amount of energy in this film. Like he just has he's almost like a new screen charisma. It's like, yo, Jesus Christ.
This film would not have been as good with anyone else. I say that unreservedly.
Yeah, it does sort of live and die by his hands, and that's not to knock the film as a whole, because I think the film is actually really good, but it does all sort of rest on his shoulders.
But I don't. I like Tom Cruise a lot, and one day we'll do like Mission Impossible and stuff. I like him a lot, but I can't picture a Tom Cruise version of this film being as good.
Well, if it was going to be Tom Cruise, I would have thought it would be like earlier. It would have been maybe late 90s, early 2000s. So maybe when it would have suited him a bit more, it would have been a completely different Iron Man.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
what do you guys remember of when this film came out and your anticipation for it and that sort of thing? Becca? Do you remember looking forward to it, or?
I think I was probably looking forward to Quantum more than anything in 2008.
Yeah, no, but that came out in November, and this was May.
This was in the summer, exactly. I think for me, Quantum of Solace was like the main event. Other films in 2008. Let me have a little look.
The Dark Knight.
Yeah, obviously The Dark Knight, definitely. I don't think what else came out.
Dark Knight was the one I was getting excited. Now, I'm a Bond fan, but despite wanting Bond films every 2 years, there was trouble at the mill with Quantum to start, because they announced it for like May, and that sounded ridiculous. And then it got pushed back, and then there was the writer's strike, and I thought, this is going to be a fucking disaster.
This is not going to go down.
The Dark Knight was the film I was like, that's the one I want. That's something.
Yeah.
I think that's the film everyone had in their minds for the Dark Knight. But I think if you can think about when this film came out, there was like a hype and almost like this is kind of like a fun appetizer till we get to the Dark Knight. You know, this was like kind of like the pre early summer film. And
I was more excited for the Hulk, because I really like the Hulk, and I've always wanted them to get it going properly and self-sustaining.
Apart from like in this series, also they tried with several actors before, and also the TV series in the 60s and 70s. And
I grew up with the TV series. I loved it.
Yeah, exactly. But like in all of the Marvel universe so far, obviously they've been not failed, but they've tried to kickstart the Hulk series. Obviously now we've got a different actor in the role, but there hasn't been like a Hulk like origin film of its own to properly, inside the MCU.
We're used to it now as well, but this came out May the 2nd, and I've always remembered that. Funnily enough, when I did change our date of birth a couple of weeks ago, I didn't have to look it up. I knew it was May the 2nd. I just always remembered that, and it was the start of summer getting earlier. It was like, oh, Chris is right. It was like a little sort of warm up. Summer hadn't really started. I mean, now we're used to it, but like May the 2nd, it was like, wow, they're putting it close enough to the summer that they're expecting it to do well, but not right in the summer. So, yeah, this will just be a warm up before The Dark Knight.
And I think it was just like a nice sort of hype of like, oh, Downey's back, and there's like something like interesting going on. Like, oh, you know, he's back and he's really great in this, and you know, it's like he seems to be sort of, you know, happy and you know not like not in this downward spiral that he used to be in. So there is like I think that was the main selling point for the film. Largely was Downey.
And everything he said, I mean, the guy has played the press wonderfully since all of this, in that he knows how lucky he is. He doesn't go into interviews and talk about his recovery and his sobriety. He doesn't do that. He actually, you know, it's unspoken
Make
unless
note,
it's brought up.
Make note.
Oh, that pissed me off, and we'll talk. That was, I think that was around Age of Ultron. We'll talk about that in future weeks if we think about it, because
did the same thing with Tarantino, didn't he?
Same thing with Tarantino, and on the one hand, it's easy to say, well, they're paid millions, they should answer these questions. But I thought it was shit stirring from a fucking idiot, to be honest. In both cases, because in both cases, the interview subjects gave them the hint that, like, come on, this is not
quite frankly,
where we want to be going.
Like they are, it wasn't basically like it was like the news, like interviewing for a movie. And I was like thinking, what the fuck is like Channel 4 News?
That's the point.
Like,
because that's the point, Chris. Because Tarantino said, but this is an advert for my movie.
Yeah.
Because he's there at a junket. He's expecting, you know, he'll have had like Total Film, Empire, Collider, fucking Birth Movies Death, or whatever it's forerunners were.
Like all the big websites and bloggers.
Yeah,
and that.
All of those would have gone in, and then suddenly Channel 4 News is there talking about violence. It's like, hang on a minute, we got about 6 minutes. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Because it's a junket. Now, I don't think in either case he asked anything criminally awful, but I just think in both cases he failed to read the mood.
Yeah,
I mean,
if it was a sit-down, like, 30-minute, an hour, like, interview...
If it was Charlie Rose, bad name to mention with what's gone on with him, but that had been that, or back in the day, like, a film
kind of thing, you know,
special
like...
with Barry Norman. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, we've talked about the link, what do you think, you expire in depth. He was looking for a soundbite in a 6-minute interview, and in both cases, and the thing that impressed me with Tarantino is Tarantino very politely said, well, he went to answer, and then he thought about it and said, I don't want to answer that, actually, because I've done 20 years of talking about it. And he was pushed on it more. And actually, after he exploded and said what he said, he went back to the interview, was asked a sensible question, and answered it so professionally. And it's like he did his job, but it was just failing to read the mood. In that both of them, you know, they started going on about Downey being a better person. It's a junket for a team-up movie. It's just not the place. I didn't mean to talk about that now, but yeah, Downey, generally speaking, doesn't sit talking about his sobriety and stuff, but he's very, very professional, and he's very keen, and I do recommend anyone follow his Twitter feed, because it's good fun. He's constantly, like, poking fun at the other Avengers and shit like that. They're all good fun, actually. Chris Evans, Tom Holland,
you can tell they're all kind of mates, aren't they? I mean, they're obviously been going for 10 years now, but they obviously know each other, and they're good friends off-screen too.
Well, the original Avengers all have a matching tattoo, don't they? They designed between them.
They designed themselves, yeah. No, that's really cool.
But yeah, let's go with first thoughts on this film. I will still rank this very, very high. Now, what was the most impressive thing to me was that I wasn't damaged by the fact that I've seen where this has all gone. It was surprisingly easy to go back and watch the sort of tentative beginnings, and, you know, I was looking at the running time of this film. The running time of this film is about 2 hours and 5, 2 hours and 6, something like that. He doesn't start designing the Mark II armor, which is the first thing that looks like proper Iron Man, if you like, the silver version, until about 54 minutes into the film. And he goes through all that between then and about an hour and 4, and I didn't even notice. The first hour of the film had given me so much quality story that it didn't bother me. And when I look back on it, the only action sequences are really him leaving the cave, him having a little fly around, but that's not really an action. That's more of a sort of discovering your powers kind of thing. The return to Golmira, and then the not-so-good action sequence with the Ironmonger at the end. It's a surprisingly small film, but it's got real heart, and it's got a man with a real arc, with a real quality performance.
Arc reactor.
Yeah, well, he's got three arcs then, because he's got this big arc reactor, the small arc reactor, and his character arc.
Multi-arc reactor.
It knows where to focus. Like it
does.
I mean, what I'd say is I think it's it's a really easy watch, really easy watch. And that sounds like almost like a light praise, but I think there is something to say when something is just so easily watchable, no matter how simple the story is or what it is. You know, if it's
I don't know where I'm going to rank it, but there's only one film that isn't a team up, and I have my own problems with the team ups that we'll get to. But in terms of films that focus on one major character, there's only one film I'm absolutely certain will finish ahead of Iron Man, unless I have a terrible viewing with this time. 22 films into a series, well, not 22 at this point, 19 at this point, because we haven't had Ant-Man and the Wasp as we start, but 19 films into this series, with all the different characters and all the different focuses, and everything deliberately being a ramping up, everything getting bigger budgets than this, comparatively speaking. I still think this is going to be very, very high up the list. And I think, actually, had the world ended in like 2009 and 2010, this would have been in the top 4 or 5 comic book movies ever made. It is up there almost with it hasn't got quite the heart of, but it's almost up there with a Superman the movie, you know, and a Batman Begins and a Dark Knight. And there aren't many others. There aren't many others that's in the same league. It's kind of analogous in some ways to like the first Spider-Man film, in that it's a very traditional comic book origin film in a lot of ways, but it's all the better for having a middle-aged man in the lead of it, someone who's a little bit older than I am now at this point, although the character might be younger, I'm not sure, but certainly a man in his 40s, or thereabouts anyway, and he's got life experience on him. It isn't some kid who suddenly finds he can do all these cool things. It's a guy who's bringing his life experience to bear to try to correct his mistakes. And I find that fascinating. And even fairly cartoonish characters in it, like Obadiah Stane, in the hands of Jeff Bridges, don't come off that way until the very end of the film. In some respects, in quality terms, I would liken it very much to something like Wonder Woman, in that it has 2 phenomenal acts and then a poor third act. But I think this is a terrific film.
Yeah, I think it's really well paced. Like as you said, when it's well, you know, he's actually in the suit like about halfway through the film. But the film starts off kind of slow. You take your time with the character, and you kind of like you establish why you care, who he is, and what his story's going to be. And then as things escalate, the pace picks up. By the time you get to the third act, it is moving at a rapid pace, and it doesn't feel like, oh my god, they're rushing this. It just feels natural. I think it's very well structured out, which I think is to its credit.
Becca?
Oh yeah, no, I had a really good time with this film. I think back in 2008, like watching this, obviously I was kind of, you know, I've heard of the character, but sadly I hadn't read the comics. But you could tell this was something special. You could tell this was a series just going to run and run and run and run and run. And here we are 10 years later, still enjoying it many billions of dollars later on. No, I had a really good time with this film. To be fair, I'd not seen it since its release. There are other Marvel films that I've gone back to over this one. But I kind of, my neglect, I felt really guilty. Because, yeah, it's a really good film. It's balanced. And I was kind of sort of reading some information about it, and they really did struggle. Obviously, they wanted to keep this as grounded as possible. much of the later Marvel films have become like more fantastical, if that's a word, more fantastic. But this one is quite grounded in reality, in like the arms trade, for example. Obviously, there's kind of a lot of sci-fi and other fantasy elements come into it as well. But they had a hard time finding somebody who would kind of oppose Stark in this way, and obviously it ended up being, as we know, his ex-business partner, which I think is quite a smart move, because you wouldn't, you'd really struggle to find a character or somebody quite smart, definitely on an intellectual level, as Stark as well.
It's the right move for this particular story, because this story is about someone who is someone who's essentially been chasing his demons, and now is in a way starting to confront them. And a lot
exactly, it's a bit of Downey Jr.'s personal history as well, isn't it? Really,
and a lot of that is to do with like Stark Industries, like I've something Stark Industries was doing stuff that I actually wasn't aware of, so I'm accountable, and it turns out like Obadiah would be the perfect villain for that particular film, because it is essentially he's like one of his demons that he just didn't notice, like one of the things he's like ignored willfully. And I think it's I don't think the film would work if you'd introduce like another superpowered villain just like randomly. I think a film works best with that, just because Jeff Bridges is anyway. But yeah, go on, carry on, Becca.
Oh no, I was literally just going to say the same. Really,
sorry, I took the words out of your mouth. I do apologise.
Yeah, pretty much. Like he's the right person for this film at the time, and it's kind of a shame he didn't come back for the next film.
Well, yeah, after being blown up
after being destroyed. Well, he originally, they were going to he was going to survive the battle at the end, and they were going to crack open the outfit, and oh my god, he's being remote controlled or something, to find that there was just actually an empty hole inside the suit. And he was going to come back in the sequel, but obviously that didn't happen. But no, after that, I think they decided to just epically destroy him up. Jeff Bridges is a fantastic actor anyway, so I think he's, as you say, Chris, he is the perfect choice for this film. Sorry, Dave.
I think it's very. It does have that origin story flaw that often happens, that you spend the first hour or so on the hero's journey to become the hero, and then you try and cram a full superhero movie into the last hour. It's not quite that, but I didn't give a shit. But I thought Jeff Bridges always adds something, and so it adds to Tony's story that you've got kind of his father's generation there, and how much he can quite be in charge with one of his father's trusted lieutenants is interesting. But the whole Ironmonger thing, I didn't really give a shit. So the fact he never came back, as great as Jeff Bridges is, didn't bother me. What I think is one of the positives about the way this universe has gone is that had they just owned Iron Man and decided, they would have tried to stretch it out to like 4 to 6 films, and it just would have been the next villain of the week each time. We've got a little bit of that with Iron Man 2 in a couple of weeks' time, but by Iron Man 3, it's being informed by the events of the Avengers, so he's got post-traumatic stress disorder and stuff like that. Well, if the Avengers hadn't been there, Iron Man 3 would have necessitated being a different film, and they probably just would have grabbed another sort of canon Iron Man villain, possibly the Mandarin. They would have been the real one and been more front and center, but that kind of wasn't what the film was about. So that's very interesting, in that the whole run of the films are very different. Captain America doesn't work as a self-contained trilogy, kind of, because it's all informed by the films that come between them, which means that when you plan for Captain America 2, it's not the film that it would have been had you not had the Avengers in between, and Iron Man 3 and so on. So that makes the universe kind of more interesting in its way. But I was never unhappy we didn't get to see Jeff Bridges again. I would love to see him again, but I don't think there was much further to go with that character.
Plus, it's nice. It's nice when a death means you're dead. It's not like, we'll bring everyone back.
Well, also, if you look at the themes, he was there as a personification of the evil side of Tony's company. So it was the personification of the evil Tony had to rid of his own company and his own past. Once you've done that, he's served his purpose. And that's one of the problems we got next week with Whiplash, because it just feels like, or a couple of weeks' time with Whiplash, because I don't feel the same sense of purpose there, even though they did try and tie it in. So he's perfect for this film, and he's perfect for the amount of screen time they can give him, in that you don't just have some random villain showing up and then you've got to show why it matters. He's entrenched within Stark Industries. So his story is being told at the same time, effectively, as the whole Tony story is being told. So it's not so much trying to drop in a self-contained superhero movie in the second hour, but it does have a little bit of that. It does have a little bit of that. Anyway, shall we discuss this film sequentially?
Yeah, go for it.
And why not?
We start.
Barry Norman.
I don't think he ever said that, but never mind.
Did not? Oh, that's a shame.
I don't think he did. I think it was.
No, it was like a misquote.
Was it the spitting image thing?
No, it was Rory Bremner, because he kept saying, "And why not?" And then people were going up to Barry Norman in the street and saying, "And why not?" and laughing. And he couldn't
that
work
was the
out
title
why.
of his autobiography, wasn't
And then he found, which I read, and then he tells this story in there, and then he found out that it was a Rory Bremner sketch. And then he either met Rory Bremner somewhere, or Rory Bremner sent him a Christmas card, and he said something like, "Next time, get your own catchphrase, or write your own catchphrase."
Yeah, get your own catchphrase.
It was purely Rory Bremner continually saying, "And why not?" while he was playing him. We start in the desert, Afghanistan. He's with the army, ready to demonstrate a new missile. And it's just several things. Firstly, the music. We start with sort of 70s rock. What's the song? It's not AC/DC, is it?
Yeah, is it Back in Black?
Yeah, it could be. I
For
can't
a
remember.
very obviously a film called Iron Man, it has a very metal score. But
Yeah. Cheers for that.
Tumbleweed.
It's the fact you do your own reviews as well. If we say something funny and then you say "badum" in case anyone wasn't sure. But nice little bit of sort of character work here very quickly. He's drinking. Well, historically, the Tony Stark character has a drink problem anyway.
Wasn't I'll call him RDJ, not to be confused with another actor with similar initials. He wasn't like teetotal, was he? Because I know he was like off drinking drugs and the rest of it. And didn't he go teetotal for a while?
He probably was, but that won't be Scotch he was drinking, obviously.
Well, no, clearly not.
But he is drinking it there. But they're also talking to him about did he fuck all the sort of like calendar girls from a certain calendar the previous year? And he says he missed out one, but the December was twins. Okay.
Double on me.
So yeah, he's there to demonstrate the Jericho, which is the new sort of Stark Industries missile, basically. I can't remember whether we see the Jericho demonstration.
It does
before the flashback or afterwards.
I think we do start off like in the just in the truck, because we see all that afterwards when we see him.
Right,
like,
so the truck is exploded first, and then we get the flashback.
Yeah, we instruct him in the truck with the soldiers, and then it gets attacks.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it blows up, and the next thing we flash back to a couple of days earlier, and he is at some award ceremony. And what I love about it is because like he's effectively a rock star as a public persona, which lends itself to really easy exposition. Because you can do basically behind the music, can't you?
Yeah, like
that's what this plays
Times
like.
It's
behind the music. It's just got a little kind of. He was born, he's born there, grew up there, went there. It was his father's company. His parent tragedy hit as his parents died. Obadiah Stane runs the company. At 21, Stark takes over, and you've got pictures of Robert Downey Jr. at that age because he's been a famous actor since his teens. And, probably magazine covers he did back in the day. It
did seem like a magazine cover for every issue part of his life.
I know.
I could kind of think of a little bit of Zoolander while watching it.
His balls have dropped, special. Pages 13 to 26. Yeah, I know. But it was a behind the music.
Yeah.
And he's not there. And so Obadiah has to go up and collect it and says he's working and he's gambling. and it plays the 1960s kind of Iron Man theme over him doing that. And there's journalists around at the event as he leaves. He's asked, he's talked to by a fit blonde. And all I could think of, because this was badly copied in Green Lantern so desperately wanted to be DC's version of this film. You remember when he screwed some pretty lady at the start of the film and he's like, there's water in the tap?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was a copy of this film. She goes up to him and says, people call you the Merchant of Death or the Da Vinci of our times, and it's like, absolutely ridiculous. I don't paint.
Yeah.
How many hours?
Death was like, oh, I like
how
that.
many hours do you sleep? I'd be willing to lose a few for you. He's just gliding through life. He's a genius, but he just says what he wants.
He's also a bit of a James Bond style character, isn't he, as well? He's womanising his drinking.
He's a bit more flippant, but he's just more.
He's more kind of Bond, without the ego and inflicted ego and all the rest of it. Definitely,
it's a different kind of. It's like a guy who's literally not taking life seriously at all. Whereas Bond probably
no reason to. He's inherited wealth, and he is a genius, so he's just been able to propagate that wealth without trying too hard.
Exactly.
And without thinking about it, without thinking about what it is they're doing.
What the impact would be.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not a complete idiot. I mean, he does have like an idea when combated with the idea that what you do, you're basically a mass murderer. He has some justification in terms of what else his company does, But obviously, he doesn't know everything that's happening behind his back.
Absolutely. So the next thing is he's back at his. That was interesting. I saw the special features to this film are pretty good. There's no commentary, but the whole design and the whole development process of the film is followed, and they showed lots of potential artwork for his house, and eventually it was effectively driven by the casting of Downey. Where would Downey's take on this character live? And so we see him back at his sort of Malibu house, waking up she's waking up in the morning, he's not there.
Yeah. He's like working away in the thing and gets we get introduced to Pepper Potts.
Now, I think it tells me you lose track of time, because I think, how long was Gwyneth Paltrow really famous? Is she still really famous? How big is she now? I remember being surprised when I saw her. Like, she hadn't been in anything for a while.
No, she hadn't done very much, has she?
Not for a while.
Up until this point, no.
She'd done a lot, but she hadn't done anything more in the early
recently
decade. I mean, she will have been working, but I'm looking and I'm thinking, well, famous films.
If you think about it, she's not really been in that much. I mean, she won an Oscar for Shakespeare in Love, and she was in 7.
Yeah.
Other than that, what famous stuff has she actually been?
Well, Shakespeare in Love. That year she did A Perfect Murder, which is basically the dial-in for Murder.
But no one remembers that.
Isn't bad.
Yeah, but no one remembers that though.
Yeah, but hang on a minute. Followed by The Talented Mr. Ripley. People remember that.
Yeah, remember that from Matt Damon. Matt Damon, Judy Moore.
That was such a good film.
Yeah, all right. Couple of years later, The Royal Tenenbaums. And she's.
Was he like Wes Anderson or not?
That was 2001. She had a cameo for the following year. Then she was in Sylvia the following year. Then Sky Captain the following year.
That was a good film.
4 years between. Sky Captain was shit, Becca. Are you sure?
No, it looked really good. The look of it. No, the plot was awful.
Yeah, but you could have just shown me a.
Good. It looked really stylish.
You could just show me a few still pictures then. I'd be like, yeah, I got the gist.
It looked gorgeous.
I so nearly walked out. It was terrible.
It looked amazing.
Yeah. But it's patchy. So when she turned up in Iron Man, I was a bit surprised. And she really
I was just sort of thinking that the main cast. Fast forward 10 years later, they don't look much different. To be honest, like they don't appear to have aged very much. I mean, like, they're quite lucky. Obviously, they've all got good genes. But I mean, even if you look at oh god, can't remember his name. Okay, cut there and it'll come to me. He plays Captain America.
Chris Evans.
Chris Evans, that was it.
Sorry. Mr. Don't Forget Your Toothbrush.
Oh yeah, that's it. I remember that in future. Thank you. But yeah. Even if you look at like Chris Evans, the Captain America, for example, you can tell like a little bit. He does age a little bit, but like I'm pretty sure like Robert Downey Jr. doesn't look like that much different. Or Gwyneth Paltrow, she literally hasn't aged. Oh my god, it's just amazing. I want
So
to know what
just-
her secret
It's
is.
more of that like banging Chris Martin. That's what it's down to.
Clearly.
She doesn't eat anything, and she, you know,
She's
Oh yeah,
Steams it.
she's got a weird relationship with water.
and she
Yeah.
steams her vagina.
Oh, that's her secret then, clearly.
Fucking mental.
I don't really want to know her secret.
Is,
though.
is, that,
the problem with-
is that the fountain of youth then? Just
She
steam your
puts it-
vagina.
Clearly.
Well, she puts it out as like medical advice. That's the thing. It's just like it's quite irresponsible. That goop fucking site she's got. But anyway,
Oop, oh my god.
Well, yeah, I mean, she said weird
Name.
stuff like, you know, water has like emotions and shit like that.
yeah, it doesn't, Gwyneth. Honest.
Like, yeah,
and if it
I
does,
forget exactly what
that's
it is,
a
but it's
level of
along those
sci-
lines.
Well, that's a level of scientific knowledge we don't have yet. So you're guessing. If you're right, that's a fucking fluke. But I like this. It's efficient storytelling. We see that he's in some trouble. Then we get a flashback that tells us everything we need to know. He drinks a lot. He's a genius. He's inherited wealth, but he's been able to propagate it from his early 20s through his own genius. He sleeps around. He lives in a wonderful place in Malibu. He hires Gwyneth Paltrow, which is
Who basically
his-
sort of like is like a surrogate. But he's basically assistant, but almost like a mother/partner figure to him.
Absolutely, yeah.
And she's always like basically sort of like
Cleaning
she's
up
picking
after.
up his pieces because he's too busy. Like
Yeah.
he's basically a workaholic, isn't he? He's either like partying hard or playing hard.
He's not sleeping. He's Gustav
Yeah.
Graves.
Yeah.
He is. He is just like Graves.
Why waste on sleep?
Don't you-
Yeah.
Plenty of time
Yeah,
to
why
sleep
was it
when
on
he's
sleep?
dead. Sneer. Yeah.
Dead.
Um,
Blind sneer.
So you
then
can't kill my dreams, Bond. But
Dreams
my
can
dreams
kill
can
you.
kill you.
Then we meet Rhodey as well.
Right.
Rhodey is Terrence Howard in this film. We'll talk about why.
Yeah, Terrence Howard this
A couple
time.
of weeks' time, we'll explain why there's a recast. We won't bother now, but it's Terrence Howard at the moment. He is, we find out later in the film, I think he's ahead of... He's basically, I can't remember the title they give him, but later in the film, his title is given. Get me the head of, and it's something like
entertainment.
new systems or something like that. So his job is largely to liaise with Stark as an outside contractor because he's selling them all the new tech. It's his responsibility to like hire it and integrate it into like the army or the Air Force.
Yeah,
or
it's like the army liaison, basically.
yeah, was it the Air Force? Whichever it
Air
is.
Force, yeah.
And so we see him and he's winding him
It's
up
awful winning when he goes, next time, baby. And it's like, wow,
later on, yeah.
you ain't good next time.
Not
Yeah.
for you.
Not for you.
But somebody else.
Yeah.
Anyway, spoiler alert.
The less you read up on Terrence Howard, the happier you'll be, trust me.
It's not a nice story.
No, it's not. So we then go back round to where we were at the start of the film. It's blown up, the convoy they're in, and he is ambushed and kind of taken hostage by the next thing you see. He's in one of those, we've seen them all over the years, those sort of pictures of Western hostages on their knees with guns at their head, no grade video sort of thing. We've seen it over the years with Ken Bigley and people like that. We'll not make light of this scene at all, even though this is entertainment, but it's a video there for the West to say, we've got this guy.
It's the 5 rings as well, isn't it?
10 rings.
10 rings, sorry.
Now,
Yes.
the theory at the time that it was when they were going to go on and have like a universe here, that the 10 rings were going to be very key in it, but I don't think they ever really became that. So he's captured with another guy called Yinsen. When Stark wakes up, he's basically wired up from a car battery to his heart because a load of shrapnel's gone into his heart. So he's built like an electromagnetic thing to put in his chest to suck the shrapnel away from his heart. And he's told that he has to build a Jericho missile for the group. They've seen this missile. They think Stark is the genius behind it all and can build them one. And they said they'll let him go if he does. Which he says openly to Yinsen, no, they won't.
Well, you know, of course they won't. They'll either like make him make another one or kill him.
Yeah. So in the interim, he is building, and this is genius. Like, what I like about Marvel is they put something in that feels small and then expand it over the years. So, for example, over the years, the amount of damage and hits and speed Iron Man can be not sort of hit at has increased, just slowly. So now when Iron Man falls out of the sky for thousands of feet, it's not an issue. The arc reactor, it's not painted as a big thing till later in the film. He just has to build this little thing to keep himself alive. and not be wired up to a battery. And
it's made almost out of like, well, I have to do it out of desperation.
Yeah. But this is something we find out later, is all the geniuses in this company can't replicate with an unlimited budget. They can only build it at something the size of like the ground floor of a house. They haven't been able to do that, which is quite interesting. He's built that arc reactor to power something, and we don't really know what immediately. But it turns out that he's kind of aware of where the CCTV on the cave is, and he's being very judicious with where he stands and what he lets everyone see. They think he's building a missile. He's building a suit.
Yeah, because his plan is to basically sort of fight his way out of there.
Yes.
And increasingly getting time limit. They suspect that he's not making the missile, so they kind of threaten.
They tell him they've got. They threaten Yinsen, and he says, "I need him, good assistant." And then eventually they tell him they've got 24 hours. Yeah. I like this, and I'm not quite sure. Maybe you can explain better why I like it. I'm not quite sure if I can put it into words. I think it's the iterations of the suit. It's that we don't have the film tell us he's a genius and then slowly see him build towards an Iron Man suit.
Is it the slow build-up of like, oh, he's like the Tin Man? It's like, okay, looks like something he made in a cave, and it's more made out of like a scrambling bit, whatever he could find together.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bit more of a fight for your life, almost like it's like guy literally coming.
It comes more out of his need to survive, really, doesn't it? But how to like not, be hooked up to a battery all the time. It's more, literally more than he's this rich, wealthy, powerful genius, and he just builds the suit, various iterations of the suit. It's literally his need to survive. So
because he isn't confident Iron Man at this point either, so he's like he doesn't
know he's going to work, does it?
No, and it's rickety. It's not always. It doesn't. It's not exactly bulletproof. Like he gets caught in between rocks with his arm and stuff, and it's it isn't perfect, but it's just something that he just could have just barged through and just get the hell out of there.
Yeah, because his main kind of power is sort of like the flamethrowers.
Yeah.
And also kind of like a propellant system as well. But it's just like you can see like how crude it is. I mean, it's still very quite effective in what you need it to do. But as you say, it's incremental, his development of it.
I think the funny little reference that's stuck in my mind when I watched this is Yinsen actually buys them some time because they've got to power this suit up. It is sort of linked up to this fairly basic computer they've got. When he said about all the way through, he's been talking about getting home to his family.
Yeah, I'll see my family after this.
Do you know what it made me think of? Made me think of John Candy in Planes, Trains and Automobiles. Where all the way through the film he wants to get home to his wife, and at the end you find out that she was dead anyway. And he's just going through the motions every year. Yinsen, we find out, it just wants to get home to his family, and at the end, when he says about getting him to his family, he says they're already dead.
This is always the plan. He already decided that he was going to die.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I found that
which is kind of because it gives Stark like a. I wouldn't say humanize him, but it humbles him to a degree. It's like here's this guy who's had everything taken away from him, and he's willing to sort of give the one thing he's got, his life, just to save me. That's kind of like, wow.
I think it drives a lot of the rest of the film, and the film isn't too on the nose about telling us that he now owes that man something. It's almost like it is almost a life debt.
Yeah.
From then on, that like you gave your life to me, I have to do better.
Yeah.
And it isn't just no one's saying he can't drink and shag around, but that's not his primary mission now. That I find very interesting. I've always liked that. I've always liked the Yinsen stuff, and you could take that character out of this and it would still work. I mean, it wouldn't work as well because he needs someone to talk to.
It does add a nice little heart to it, a nice little emotion beat, and because he's quite a warm character, when as soon as he's introduced, you are instantly taken to him.
I think so, yeah, absolutely. I really like that. So the action sequence of him getting out, what did we make of this?
Yeah, I thought it was very decent. I mean, I do. If I was to be negative about any part of the film, or the film in general, is, and I think it's the reason why it probably is not forgotten about, but kind of like not thought of as well as like the other, like the Avengers films and Captain America's and Guardians, what have you, is, as good as I think the film is, there's not like a standout moment where you go, wow. There's not like a...
Golmeria would be the closest, but when you rewatch it, there's not a lot to that.
Yeah. So, it's just a very sort of well-crafted, very easy watch
but then
film.
It's not an action film. The action is just there to punctuate the story. Well, if he's going to be Iron Man, we need to... I think so. I think it's depends on the type of film, of course, but it works. It serves the material here. Now, it might be a coincidence because they didn't have comparatively a lot of money and the main character is going to be largely CG every time he's in action, and that eats money. But I think it works really well. And I just like the fact that there's an awkwardness to it. The character's really, really heavy. The special features show you some of the doubles trying to walk in that suit. And, Downey did a bit as well. And he said, you can handle it. He said, it isn't too bad. He said, but you do half an hour. He said, and the next day you just feel completely spaced out. You weren't aware it had taken that degree of a toll on you. But, there's a lot of fire and a lot of bullets. So I think it sells peril, particularly as his eyes and mouth and that have got gaps in it. And when he takes off, he goes up maybe 100 yards in the air, and then the whole thing starts cutting out. So I think it's deliberately a little bit awkward and a little bit chaotic.
Yeah, it's very risky. I think for kind of that kind of very initial, very early on iteration of it, it's not going to be perfect, is it? But as you say, it's deliberately kind of like chaotic, difficult to control, very difficult to fly. Obviously, you can't go very high in it.
Too heavy.
He has just like scrambled together in a cave with whatever you find. So a lot of it in it with time constraints. So it would be.
It's not a critique. I think what I'm trying to say is the film sells us both the genius of what he's created and its very, very real limitations.
Yeah.
Trial and error. But definitely, yeah. The first out of the gate, it's not going to be perfect, even for a genius like Stark.
Absolutely. And then what? So he gets he basically crashes. The suit kind of falls apart around him. And then the next thing we see, he's sort of getting home, isn't he?
Yeah, he's kind of walking along, and an army helicopter comes and picks him up.
Yeah, there's some damage on him. He's got like a dislocated shoulder or something like that. He's in a sling. They fly him home. The first thing he wants is a bit of product placement.
An
American burger. Yeah.
To be fair, you do sort of like see that. I think, I fancy a fucking burger.
I did want one after.
That's the
thing. When you think Jon Favreau made Chef, which had all that wonderful food in it, and I love Chef, by the way. And yet, probably the most I've ever wanted any food in a film was that burger.
Just a bit of Birkin, which we all know is fucking overrated anyway. But it's not even like really sort of well shown. It's just sort of it's just there casually.
He's got it grabbed in his fist. I don't know why maybe it's because I think possibly we almost feel the dehydration of the character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, the very fact he's just got some sustenance is like, oh, thank God.
Yeah,
so
we'd be similar. Well. Had we been gone through a really traumatic time, halfway in a dangerous part of the world, we probably just give me, you know what I really love, just some fucking junk food shit. Just give it to me, because I've been aching for this sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're not fussed about fine dining. You're fussed about give me something quick. And also, I'm a vegetarian now, but I know the only time I ever crave meat is when I'm, tired or run down. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think my body needs it, but I think my brain tricks my body into thinking I need it.
Yeah.
because you associate like meat with iron and protein and sustenance. So I think all of those things play into your mind when you're like watching this. I don't know why we spent that long talking about a burger we don't even fucking see, Chris. But he wants to go straight to a press conference, doesn't he? The press are there waiting for him, and he's immediately
burger first. But yeah,
they're trying to hold him off, and he goes straight in, sits down, which again is the film allowing us to see that he's a little bit hurt and injured and tired and everything else.
Yeah, but you know what I thought was, I don't know if it was like the character doing it deliberately, or it's just the way they filmed it. But it makes everyone sits down, and then he goes to make a point. He stands up, and everyone's still sitting down.
I don't know. I never really thought about that.
I know. Just thought like, oh yeah, that's
there's
clever.
only one
That's
thing
clever.
There's only one thing I did notice about the choreography of the crowd, and it was at the second press conference later, which I'll talk about then. In fact, I'll mention it now. At the end of the film, when he drops that bomb,
On that bombshell.
well, it isn't a spoiler.
on that
Actually,
bombshell.
it isn't a spoiler because the whole Marvel universe is largely based on there's no alter egos. And I actually thought they fucked this film up when they did that at the end. But anyway, he announces he is Iron Man, and all of them jumped to their feet except the journalist he slept with. She stayed resolutely in her seat. But
I didn't notice that.
no, I only noticed it this time because she asked the question, and she sits looking resolutely unimpressed while the rest of them leap up. But he announces that they're stopping weapons already. Talks a little bit about his father. As bad as Iron Man 2 can be in places, I quite like his father's stuff. And I always like Tony father stuff, and we'll come back to that in future weeks. But he says
that's a very interesting character as well. And we also have to discuss Agent Carter too.
Definitely, yeah, we'll talk about that through all the Captain America films, or certainly the first two. He announces that he talks about his father and he never got to say goodbye. That does sound like rambling, which actually sells when they kind of say, well, he's not of his right mind. It's like, well, yeah, he did ramble a bit, to be fair. But he announces immediately they're stopping making weapons. And immediately he's wrestled away. And Obadiah's like, well, what we should take from this is Tony's back and all this kind of shit. And you can see Obadiah's immediately like, oh, shit!
Damage control.
That is their immediate kind of, that's the vast bulk of their money, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we see like sort of like them crazy stock market shows where you're like just that basically plays to Looney Tunes. It's just like, oh fucking hell.
Yeah, it was kind of like the stock market version of like an Alex Jones show or something. Smashing cups, Stark Industries, sell, and all this kind of shit.
But it's basically George Clooney in Money Monster.
I've not seen that.
Oh,
Is it
it's
good?
on Netflix actually, I think.
Is it?
Yeah, that's a good film. It's quite short as well.
Is it?
Yeah.
All right, okay. Look that up now.
Like an hour and a half or something. It's really good.
He immediately so he's kind of shut out of his own business, not officially till later when we told there's an injunction, but he's kind of working from home, isn't he? And he starts basically doing this. We meet Jarvis for the first time, Paul Bettany.
Yeah, well, hear him.
Well, we hear him.
Yeah.
Well, that's all there is to interact with, actually, because he's a computer program.
Just a rather very intelligent system.
What's that film called while you're at it? Money Matters. Money what?
Money Monster.
Money Monster. Got it.
I think isn't it directed by
Jodie Foster.
Jodie Foster? Yeah.
Why have I never heard of this film? It's only 2 years ago.
I don't know.
Julia...
And it's got George Clooney.
Yeah,
on it.
all right. Yeah, that's on the list. You're right. I've stuck it to my list now. Cool. I'll get to that. It's got good ratings as well. Excellent. All right. Yeah. All right.
Have you seen? Just on the side note, have you seen The Beaver? The other film she did.
That's the Mel Gibson film.
Yeah.
I haven't.
I didn't see that on grounds of it starring Mel Gibson.
It's worth seeing just because it's.
Oh,
fucking
grow up!
mental.
Just because he's a racist wife beater, there's anything. It's anything with you people.
I mean, that basically describes half people in Hollywood anyway. So like.
It sounds really cheesy.
So we can't
It's, got
discriminate
this
now.
puppet, so I'm like, oh.
Actually, that was Jodie Foster was a long-time friend, and that was.
Well, yeah, no, that's fine. I might check it out actually.
Give him a chance after all.
Now that the dust has settled.
Yeah, but anyway, so he starts. He's clearly sort of. He says he wants to keep it. He doesn't trust his company. He's aware of something. He couldn't put it into words, but he wants to keep it on a private server. this like, new venture he's got, and it is him sort of starting to design a suit.
Yeah, it's like so he's basically sort of decided, right, I'm going to change the company in a new direction. Not sure what that is, but I'm going to need time to figure it out. And he's kind of like, we got a lot of people like sort of slagging off, or the rest of the sort of shareholders of the company a bit worried, obviously, because it's like thinking, what the fuck are we going to sell?
It's a public company as well. I mean, the very fact it's on a stock market show means that you can't. In defence of Obadiah, now he's not defensible with what we find out, but even had he been a perfectly decent human being, he would have a point, because you're supposed to announce these things to the fucking stock market first. You're not supposed to just say at a press conference, we're completely changing. You can tank your company. So that wasn't the way to do it. Although you can totally understand with what's just happened to him. And he's actually seen all these weapons. He was in Golmira. Yeah. He sees all these weapons.
He saw one, explode in his face.
Well, it's just, the naivety is he thought he was selling it to, the right people. And, of course, there's a black market for it all. And not even a black market, because it's being sold by his company to people it shouldn't be. But the fact is, once it's out there, it's like nukes. Once it's out there, you're never quite sure who it's going to. So I understand that. And he's building basically a new suit. And there's a lot of humour in this, isn't it? Him sort of... the one bit that surprised me is I always said, the hits Tony is able to take have been ramped up. But when he first tries the thrusters on 10% and they throw him against the back wall, that would break every bone in your fucking body, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Some of these scenes, I'm surprised how he survives, really, to be honest.
Funny, though.
I just think it's amazing.
And again,
I know it's a film, but
it's Marvel treating the extraordinary as quite ordinary, so you just accept it. Yeah. He's talking to robots like they've got feelings.
Sure.
Like the little robots holding the fire extinguishers that keep squirting him. When he tells them off, they look hurt.
Yeah.
And you don't question it, because Marvel have just presented it as just, no, that's what it is.
Well, it's a lighter touch. It's not like The Dark Knight. If it was in The Dark Knight, you'd think, oh, fuck's sake, this just doesn't...
I know it's tone-specific, but it still has to set that tone, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm really impressed by that. And really, the next few minutes is him building it, isn't it? What becomes the Mark II, which is kind of the armour we know, but kind of chromy and very rivety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that where he goes for a flight?
I think, don't we see Pepper change his arc reactor in the interim? He's built another one now. He's at home with his stuff.
Oh yeah.
That scene where she's got a reach inside his chest, which obviously must be CG, and I always thought that was really well done. And he keeps everything to himself. What else? Yeah, there he goes for a flight. And Jon Favreau talked a lot about making that as joyous as possible. And I think he nailed it. The music and the flight is extraordinary. He's a little bit awkward, but reasonably in control. And the music's good, I think.
Yeah, the score as well.
And you get introduced to the icing problem.
And of course, the icing problem, but it's also Tony. It's like, let's have a go. There's risk in this, but there's risk.
Let's see how far you can push it.
Yeah, he's doing far more with it than he's supposed to be. Nearly crashes into the fucking street at one stage. But I love all that. That's really good. Then what? Do we go straight to that party?
I'm trying to remember now. I mean, which party is that? Is that the... No, don't we get don't Pepper Potts make something out of the old one after he said trash it? The old...
Yeah, she makes a little gift of it, proof that Tony Stark has a heart.
Yeah.
But they go out to this part. Well, he's there sort of working on probably what becomes the Phase 3, the Mark III. And he's got entertainment news on in his workshop, and there's a Stark Industries party, and he's not even been invited. So he goes to that. Pepper's there, and they have a very strong, flirty scene. There's quite good chemistry between these two.
There's really chemistry between them. They are very believable as a couple.
Yeah, I mean, it's not incendiary. It's not one of the great chemistries, but it's there. I believe that they have a regard for each other and a sexual tension. And then I think the journalist he slept with at the start of the film turns up and actually shows him photos. of Golmira, and he's like, when were these taken? And it was like, that day or within a few days.
Or yesterday.
And of course, and he believes that he thought his company had stopped selling weapons. And he goes out to talk to Obadiah, and Obadiah had said to him, Obadiah had already warned him, they're going to raise an injunction and lock you out of the company, and he admits that he did it. He locked him out for his own good. And whilst he was at the party...
Snidely doing it while posing for a picture, so...
I like that, though. That's really good. And while he was at the party, there was like a 6-hour rendering process for the Mark III armour. He's left it being built. So he goes straight back and basically jumps into the Mark III. Which is the Iron Man suit for this film, basically.
Yeah, because he goes on a rage because he sees the news reports of refugees in trouble over there. And it's just like, no one's going to be doing something. And it's like, it is very cliche, like, who will step in now? And
Yinsen was from Golmira. He mentions it earlier. So again, it's this holding, that he owes this guy a debt because he helped him get out. And helped him not develop this tech, but certainly help him build the forerunners of this tech. So he flies to Golmira. Which, again, I think there's some cut scenes around this, because I don't think it was meant to be a straightforward one flight from the United States. But it doesn't matter. He flies to Golmira. And this is kind of probably the best action sequence of the film. There's not much to it, really, is there?
No. I mean, he does... It does what you need to do at the time emotionally.
Yeah, absolutely.
You see, like, the people who kidnapped him, and they're, like, basically sort of murdering families and separating them and taking them as prisoners or whatever. And
he walks a fine line here as well, Jon Favreau, in that, again, we could have gone the Star Trek Generations route, or whichever one it was, where like a kid drops a toy.
Yeah. Actually,
when kids are separated from their parents here, it actually feels kind of traumatic.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like cheap manipulation. It is. They're people we've not met, but it's actually really well handled.
Yeah, well, it's not like a teddy bear dropped on the floor. It's like, it's a father about to be murdered, and then a son trying to run into his arms. You think, fucking hell, that kid might get executed now as well. And just all these kind of thoughts. You think, Jesus Christ, this is fucking. Does this kind of go with this film?
I know, he only just lands in time, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And really, it's an awful lot of like repulsors, where you see him like pushing people back with the repulsors that come out of his hands. That's all been trailed by what we've seen him do. We've seen him cock all this up in his or work out the kinks in his workshop, where he sort of used it and blown himself backwards and things like that. Targeted little sort of rockets on his shoulders that kind of can pick out which is which, because the interface has got Jarvis in it, so there's proper AI on all this kit. Blows up a tank, blows up all his kit.
That's probably
gets
the best
the hostages
part
free.
of it, like in terms of like what I say, like in terms of like the moment of the film that's like in the trailer, when he gets shot down by a tank, just casually gets up. Fires, he just steps aside, misses him, just fires like it's like rocket that just sounds like a pellet, just blows it up. That's pretty cool. Yeah,
it's really good. And again, it is a cliche in that the walking away from an explosion and not looking at it, but it's done really well.
All cool guys walk away from.
I know, it's done really, really well though. But the memorable part of this is him flying home. He's on his way home.
Yeah,
and he's spotted in the region by like Army intelligence or Air Force intelligence, whichever it is.
Aircraft.
Unidentified bogey. Get us the head of like product development or whatever it's called, which is Rhodey. Rhodey calls Stark and says, "Have you got anything in the area?" And Stark's out of breath because he's in the suit, which I love. Then he says he's driving. Then he says, "No, I'm running."
Jogging.
I thought you were driving. Yeah, I was driving on the way to.
Yeah. Yeah, the gym or whatever. Yeah.
And it's me, I'm the bogey. He's hanging on the bottom of the plane, sort of land, Millennium Falcon on the sort of Star Destroyer style. And basically the sequence is them trying to kill him and him trying to stay alive. He saves one of the guys who has to. He's blown back through the wing of one of them at a point, then has to save the guy who kind of ejects.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of cool.
yeah, it's a good scene. It's a good scene. So where'd you go to next?
Well, I guess that the next time the next must be. I don't know if there's anything in between, but I know the 10 rings of find the suit, and
well,
Obadiah
they find
goes
a
to
mask. I was like,
well,
right, what are you going to do?
They managed to piece together most of it in the end.
Yeah.
And then they get Obadiah goes to see them.
Oh, that pesky Obadiah, yeah. And then we introduced to this nice little...
He's got this little gadget that kind of paralyzes you for 15 minutes.
Which I really like as a bad guy weapon.
He's taken the suit to basically reverse engineer one. That's what he's doing. So he's taken the seats. He kills the 10 rings, basically. And so we know he is guilty. I think Tony sees some footage of himself with them talking, and he gets it translated, and it's clear it's Obadiah as well, isn't it? Pepper finds that. Sorry, he sends Pepper in, because Pepper can get into the company and he can't. She sends him into his office, and she finds and downloads that footage. And so they now know it's Stain. At the same time, Phil Coulson turns up from S.H.I.E.L.D. and kind of almost escorts her out of the building. Doesn't know she's in any trouble, but they walk and talk and get out of there.
Yeah, Phil Coulson for that entire film has been constantly pestering Pepper Potts for like...
Yeah, he announces himself as being from, well, he says Strategic Homeland. I forget what S.H.I.E.L.D. even stands for now. Whatever it is, it's...
and it keeps like, oh, that's a bit of a mouthful, or you need to get a better name for that. Yeah.
I think it was Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics, I think.
Yeah, Strategic Homeland. Yeah.
Just looking it up now, and it's had various over the years. But that gets worse in Iron Man 2. It's all right at this stage. You just think, why does this guy keep turning up? But
there's a very big reason why.
He's got Stark Industries working on trying to duplicate this arc reactor. And when Tony came home, he saw the one in Tony's chest. So he knows it exists, and they can't do it. So he ends up going to Tony's house, paralysing him and taking it, doesn't he? And at the same time, he's built this massive suit, which looks a bit like the Mark 1, but it's much, much bigger. The Iron Man looks a bit like a cross between Mark 1 and the Iron Giant.
Pretty much. I think it's just all, it's... Whereas Tony Stark is like sort of like sleek. He's just like, no, just destruction and just like smash type stuff. But yeah, no, he basically is like, well, I can't make it, I'll just fucking take Tony's, and that's that.
So they've now got proof it's Stain. Potts and S.H.I.E.L.D. tried to go and get Stain, but he's in the armour. Tony is basically left paralysed and dying on his sofa, because we found out earlier when Pepper removed the original arc reactor that when it's removed, if it isn't replaced immediately, you go into cardiac arrest. He manages to crawl down into his workshop where she's got that present, which is the original arc reactor, proof that Tony Stark has a heart. So he puts that one in, but he's going to be overpowered. And really, I'm not going to have an awful lot more to say about the film from scene
I do really like that touch, though. The fact that something that he said, I'll just throw it away.
It's all set up and payoff.
Yeah.
This is a very, very tight script.
I think that's the thing I really like about it, though. It's just, it's something that I call a perfect movie. Not necessarily mean like, oh, it's like 5 stars all the way, but it is tight. It's thought out. It doesn't sort of waste any scenes.
Everything's got a point.
Yeah, I can't think of a scene which I thought, well, that could have been cut out or.
And I'm looking at the screenwriters and what they've done, and the only thing from the two writing teams that's really any good on film-wise is Children of Men. Apart from that, most of their stuff's fairly undistinguished. But this is
film.
Sorry?
Children of Men is a good film.
Yeah, but there's not an awful lot there that's very distinguished. Is all
There's
I'm
very
saying.
good, very good book too. I recommend the read.
I never thought about it till I watched it this time, that how tight the script to this is. Everything has a point, everything is set up and payoff.
Yeah, there's no bagginess to it.
It's either driving the plot or it's developing character at all times. In that sense, it's like, it's getting on for Back to the Future quality. And that will be reflected when I come to rank it, because there's very few films in this series that are this tight. Over 2 hours as well. really crams a lot in. Doesn't give us anything we don't need. I guess the next thing now is this Iron Man versus the Ironmonger.
Yeah, pretty much. Like Pepper Potts basically gets in peril, and you basically
Yeah, she's a little bit woman in peril, isn't she?
Well, you know,
It's to be expected.
Don't like the third act of this film very much.
It does go a bit downhill. I think in terms of like a sort of nemesis.
When I say it's tight, I am talking about the first two acts, because the third act is just give us a perfunctory action sequence.
well,
Yeah, this is it. It's kind of just you got to do it.
I would, to be fair, you do have to have these end sequences. As much, I mean, you can make the point that okay, they could be more original with how they do it, or make the action scene just a really knockout action scene.
The problem is, at this stage, you put them both in their uniforms, close their sort of helmets, so it's just two CGI sprites fighting each other, and in some respects, Obadiah's like an uncle to him, a surrogate father figure. I think we needed to see the whites of their eyes an awful lot more, which doesn't fit in an Iron Man film. And in fact, in future weeks, it doesn't matter as much. But I just think with this particular relationship, so not only do you shut them in their armor, but their armors are massively mismatched. So in some respects, the Ironmonger's got a similar problem to Ang Lee's Hulk, in that it was so much bigger than human beings that you couldn't relate the two almost, whereas you can with like the Ruffalo Hulk and the Norton Hulk. There's a bit of that to it. It's just, and the action's not that good, and also Stain turns into just a complete cackling fuckwit. I mean, earlier in the film, he had a point. It was a bad point, and he was evil, and he was trying to kill people, but it was all about this company and what he was trying to do with it. Now he's throwing cars full of people at Tony, and it's almost like mwahaha. It's like, what are you doing? This is not consistent with your character.
Could be. I mean, you could throw the argument the fact that now he has this certain power. It's just gone to his head, and now he's just basically.
I don't hate it, but
yeah.
It's the weakest bit of the film by a distance.
Yeah, I mean,
and again, it's got that first film. It's got that first film syndrome as well. But again, it's comparatively cheaper than the rest. So, if this had like, I don't know, some of the quality of the action from later in the series, later in the Marvel series where they really threw money at it, then maybe they would have made something of it. But it's two people fighting in like a relatively underpopulated street. I
think you're right. Maybe a bit more imagination would have gone to it, but in terms of like, two animated people fight out, I can't see how you can not do that to a degree. Cause it's how these things go. I can't see how you.
Yeah. Jon Favreau's great at people.
If you did it as like Tony and Stain, going like having a fist fight in not in a suit, that would be a bit like, hang on, what? Yeah,
make it like the Thomas Crown Affair. Let them have an erotic game of chess. I just think you can see. I mean, at this point, I think he'd done Zathura at this point, but Jon Favreau hadn't done a lot. I think he may have. No, he didn't. Doug Liman directed Swingers, but he did direct Maid.
I'm not seeing Maid.
It's okay.
Kind of like it's like a spirit animal Swingers.
Yeah, it is. It's not as good as Swingers, though. But it's all right. It's pretty decent. And he done Zathura, but no one really knew what kind of director he is. And all these years on, I'm still not sure, because he did.
No, he's got quite an eclectic CV, hasn't he?
Well, he did Iron Man 2,
to many genres,
which is similar to this, obviously. And then he did Cowboys and Aliens, which was a great idea. It didn't really work out that well, but
I enjoyed Daniel Craig in that film.
Bless them forever.
That's all I can say about it.
The actors were good. The acting was good. The actors were good in it. But anyway, then he went and did then he did Chef, which was a little sort of sweet-hearted,
amazing. I don't watch it if you're hungry.
Chef is on Netflix.
Yeah, it's a really good film.
It's on British Netflix anyway, and I unreservedly adore it. It may have been one of my favourite films of that year.
Couple of people really surprised. I wasn't expecting to like it, and I
couple of people I know on Twitter don't like it. I think Ian Nesbitt thinks it's very, very twee. Didn't like it at all, and I respect that. But I genuinely, unreservedly love it. But it's all about interaction between people, and there's a lightness and sweetness to it. That's
it does make you want to go out and just cook stuff. Just like
It really
Yeah,
does. I'll say, don't watch it when you're hungry.
I imagine he did a fair bit of it himself, but there would have been a hand double for some of it to do some of the close-in cooking. And this is like a world-class chef. And you see him cooking. You actually do see him at work. And it's great, and it's lovely, and it makes you hungry. But it's very sweet. It's a father-son story and a bit of a love story as well. And that, the DNA of that is in this, or vice versa.
Yeah,
in
a man rediscovering himself.
Yeah, I mean, he's just great at people with people talking to people. And it isn't that he can't do action. I'm not saying that at all. There's some pretty good action in Iron Man 2 for all its faults, and this isn't too bad. But that's where his talent lays. It doesn't surprise me that I thought for a minute he directed Swingers. He didn't. It was Doug Liman. But that's very much in his wheelhouse. I can see him doing it. So the end of this film is less interesting. But you know, you've got to give him something to overcome as the Iron Man character, and you do have to sort of get this bogey out of his company so he can pursue more altruistic means, I guess. So it all makes sense in theory, but in practice, I don't really like it that much.
Yeah, it's a common thing. I mean, a lot of people don't generally like the third act of these things. It's a common complaint. It's just something that I just can't see any escape from. It's like, well,
It's the origin. It's a problem of an origin.
It's like, you know. It also it's an audience expectation as well. It's like audience expect like a big fight up at the end. You know, so if you don't do that, people are going to walk away disappointed. But I admit it probably could have done better, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, never had the same problems with it as some people, but like that's the weakest bit of Batman Begins as well, where you take this really literate, intelligent film full of great themes, and at the 20 minutes at the end is like, oh, I suppose we better give everyone an action sequence. It's going to be a repeating problem through Marvel, because an awful lot of these films, I think, are amazing until the last 20 minutes, and they just become, oh yeah, whatever.
Well, quite a common thing was like, oh well, let's destroy another city.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that's particularly good when we get to some of the films later, where there is a real personal connection, and the villains have been built up over time, and they're not really villains anyway. It'd be quite obvious what film I'm talking about, but I won't spoil it here. Where there's real heart in that final battle because it means something. Here it should mean something because Obadiah means something to him. But they've styled him a little bit comedy villain in his look. And of course, most of Tony's journey has been by himself after Yinsen. Occasionally Pepper walks into the room, and when he was in the cave, Yinsen was there. But him and Obadiah necessarily haven't been able to spend very much time together. So this slaying of a father figure doesn't carry the same weight. It does in character development, but it doesn't one-on-one when they're opposite each other. Do you know what I mean? It's like Batman Begins, when it's Ducard in front of him. We've seen them spend time together, and it meant more. But it's still, that's not to knock the film. I think it's outstanding. So it finishes off with a big arc reaction.
Yeah, so basically he falls into the big thing and explodes, and then there's a big press conference. He has to explain himself.
And she'll give him a cover story, which is all about being on some fucking yacht or something.
And say it was the bodyguard, but actually no. He decides to reveal all.
Well, we don't know that till he goes out, because he does start following the script to start with. And then there's
I'm not the hero type, clearly.
The bit I love is, and it's so only Downey could have delivered this line like it. And I won't get the line right, but it's roughly, he says something like, and of course, about being a superhero, and it goes, even though that would be outlandish and fantastic. It's just the way he says that. It's just like, you could just tell he's fighting the urge. And then he looks up and he went, the truth is, and there's a long pause and he says, I am Iron Man.
Yeah, he looks at the card. Yeah. There was a sense of, fuck it.
I'm Iron Man.
And it shows how little I knew, because it didn't ruin the film, because I thought, as a self-contained film, that's genius, but I thought they've just fucked up their universe. I just thought, because everyone knows who he is now, that's not going to work, is it?
Well, because wasn't it in the comics? It was something to do with that was the excuse that he gave, and then like I think was it in the early 2000s, he kind of sort of revealed his identity or something. But like typically as a hero, they would always keep their identity a secret, or they would have like a dual identity.
I just thought you've basically.
So it's quite refreshing.
Well, I thought basically you've put a funny line on the end of your film. You've Jon Favreau being Jon Favreau, and you haven't thought about what comes next. And of course they had, and I was completely wrong.
I mean, yeah, I didn't know quite whether Tony Stark was always known to the public as Iron Man, or when I don't know the history, or no, at the time, it did feel like a nice little punchy way to end the film, and to divert expectation.
That's what I mean, though, to end this film.
But it kind of felt true to the character as well. It did feel like a kind of like, yeah, you know what?
But you've still got to think about what do you do next.
Yeah.
That's all.
Oh, yeah,
we know what they did next. I'm sat here complaining, like, how are they going to figure that out? We know they figured it out, and it wasn't a problem. But
I know
in 2008, I just thought
happen next, though. It could have been.
I just remember thinking, I love that. I genuinely love that. I think they just fucked themselves up. It was a bit like the end of Spectre. It was like, well, I didn't love the end of Spectre, but it was a bit like that. It's like, well, that's lovely to end this film, but you've got to make another one. What do you do now, you twats?
Yeah.
You know, we'll still work out whether Bond has shit the bed or not yet.
Yeah.
But certainly here, I thought it was a great way to end the film. But of course, they all leap up, desperate with questions, and she stays resolutely stuck to her seat. And
Unimpressed.
Long run of credits
to Iron Man by Black Sabbath.
Black Sabbath, which is great. I love
It's an epic tune. Very cool. I love it.
I always remember what's he called? Ozzy Osbourne being interviewed by Frank Skinner.
Oh God!
And Frank Skinner said to him, he said, "Do you know when I was 18, I was in a band that used to play Sabotage." And Ozzy Osbourne said, "Funny enough, so was I."
So was I.
Oh yeah, you would be, wouldn't you?
This is it.
This was meant to be an Easter egg at the end of the film. He goes home, puts the lights on. Nick Fury is stood there. Well, first of all, in the ultimate line of comics from the early 2000s, Nick Fury was retconned, or not retconned, but that universe's Nick Fury looked like Samuel L. Jackson. He was designed to look like Samuel L. Jackson rather than either the blonde version or the Hoff. So that was they thought.
That's a Patreon episode you can do. The Hoff.
It is.
You could ask us to do. You could definitely ask us to do some of the TV Marvel films if you want. So they offered him the part to cast him as the role because the comic book looked like him, but the comic book was designed to look like him in the first place. And he just says to him, "You're not the only superhero in the world. You know, you just don't know it yet. And I'm here to discuss the Avenger Initiative," which didn't mean anything to me at the time because, like I say, Justice League was a lot more well known. I'd suggest if you weren't a Marvel Comics fan. That's not the case now, obviously.
Now there was at the time there was a little bit of like, okay, we'll wait and see, because there was an element of like, you know, we're just unsure how this will come about. I mean, we didn't really. Well, I didn't really entirely believe it till they actually had the press announcement and they had the cast with Josh
Which
Whedon.
was after Iron Man 2, because Iron Man 2 came out in like May 2010. Comic-Con is normally June or July. In fact, we're in July now and Comic-Con hasn't happened this year, so it must be July. I think I get Comic-Con's dates mixed up with Glastonbury or something.
Yeah.
Comic-Con's July, so we're coming up to it again now. So a couple of months after Iron Man 2, they got them all together and announced it. And Iron Man 2 has got tons of flaws that I thought would devil them through the whole series because it's full of like advertising the next film, and they did a bit too much of that in Phase 1. But Iron Man 2 is definitely the worst offender.
Oh God, yeah.
I thought it was a terrible idea. We'll talk about it in future weeks. I never wanted team-ups. Now I'm going to talk very highly of some of the team-ups with reservations, and when we rank them, I'm pretty sure some of the team-ups are going to be very high up the list. In fact, it could be very dominated by a lot of the team-ups.
At the moment, I know which one is going to be the number one spot for me.
Yeah, I do too. But don't forget, by the time we rank, we'll have seen another 3. So
it's still going to be the number one spot. It's not going to change. I
would be very surprised if mine wasn't as well. Without telling me, do you think it's the same film I'm putting top?
I don't know which one we're putting top, so...
I'm going to type it for you.
Oh, wait, okay.
I'm going to type it for you. My number one is going to be, at the moment, that.
Okay, let me read it. Hold on. No.
That's not your top?
Well, it's in the top, but it's not my top.
Okay. No, I'd be interested, because I was just interested.
It might be the number 2.
Okay, fair enough. That's top at the moment, but there's 3 to go, so it could change. They would have to be phenomenal. But even then, when you look back on Marvel films, they change with time, because the film I think I'm going to put top, the impact of that film hasn't reverberated as much as I thought it would through the rest of the films and stuff. I think, so you really can't tell, and it's an ever-moving feast. But I didn't want team-ups. I thought this would be a disaster, where, you've got cheesy fucking exchanges and people coming in from not other continuities, but almost other worlds, if you like the Incredible Hulk and all his heroes.
Yeah, the big concern was, how could you go from Thor to Iron Man? How can you
Yeah, they would all be mismatched, and even on practical terms, I thought, well, the score's going to be a fucking mess, isn't it? You've got Iron Man as a score, and then Thor, which is going to sound nothing like it, and then Captain America. Then you're going to shove them together, and it's just going to be. They're all going to have their own little leitmotif, cues and stuff. How's that even going to work? And it will look overstuffed. Now, there's some validity to that last argument. I certainly think some of these team-ups have been a touch overstuffed, but what was being put in train here, I dreaded. I thought, well, I want to follow Iron Man now. I want to follow him and see him fight, the next villain and the next challenge in his own life. I don't want it to be diluted by coming back to him 4 films later and we've almost forgotten about him and stuff like that. And actually, it's not ended up working like that, because, like I say, Captain America had better sequels because they were informed by things that happened in between. And I think that's true of Iron Man. Iron Man 3 is a very non-traditional sequel. And it's because of the films that happened in between. If they had just done Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3, Iron Man 3 would have been nothing like what we got.
Yeah.
For good and
still would have been Favreau as well, wouldn't it? Presumably.
Well, yeah, because they'd have taken a bit longer, whereas they tried to rush him, and he was like, I can't do this. Because I think he was already starting pre-production on Cowboys and Aliens and stuff like that. So they rushed him, and he's still a producer, and he still acts in the film. I don't think there's any ill will. But he was like, I can't work like this. And we'll talk about it in a couple of weeks' time, because I do have problems with that film. They made mistakes. They made most of them in the first phase. Some of the first phase films are great. The first film characters are great, but they made mistakes. In trying to put this universe together, it was going to be one thing, and then it changed, and actors went, and actors left and came back, and plans and arcs they had for characters got dropped, and they were a bit cheap on some of these films. I'm going to have real problems with Thor on some of that. By Iron Man 2, they're advertising the Avengers, and I'm thinking, concentrate on this fucking film first, please.
Yeah, they do get ahead of themselves a little bit.
They've got the tone much better now. They have. They do tip the nod to future films, but they tend to keep it to post-credit sequences or just little Easter eggs and references and things that maybe pay off later. As for this film, I think this is still one of the finest superhero films ever made. I think were it not for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it would be so much higher. And I think the funny thing is, I'm a bit schizophrenic on the Marvel Universe in that I think most of the films are kind of averagey. They're kind of all right, most of them. They're always a good time. They're very rarely bad. I've enjoyed most of them. I can count on the fingers of, I wouldn't need all my fingers on one hand to tell you the ones I'm not that fond of. It's very good. But at the same time, they have had enough major event films and enough films that really did surprise me that Iron Man has sort of slipped a little over the years. That there's now a few films from this universe that I think that took it on a bit further. But as a very traditional, in some ways, origin film goes, it's right up there. It's better than the first Spider-Man film. It's better than the first X-Men film. I think it's comparable to a Batman Begins. But it has a lightness of tone and a humour that Batman Begins would never have gone for, obviously, and appropriately would never have gone for. I think it's the most influential comic book film of all time. I think the Avengers was probably as important because they needed to prove they could physically team them up. They needed to prove here are 5 to 7 major leads in the same film. But in terms of setting the tone for what has followed and setting a timeline, a tone of success and a brand that the public have bought into, that these films vary so much more than people give it. Because I've read social media where people have said all Marvel films are the same. and I don't know what they're watching, because there's different characters, there's different tone, there's different themes, there's different subgenres being employed, but they all have a similarity of tone. I will give you that, and that was set by this film. So absolutely historic.
I think when they
in a
say
way
that, it's like it's in terms of like of a basic structure, like a formula to an extent. I mean, I'm not sure I actually agree, but I will find out doing this.
Yeah, there's a lot of cookie cutter complaints about it. Oh, it's all very cookie cutter and safe and Disney and all that. Well, I don't agree with that. I think when we get to Avengers 4, let's see how they solve some of the plot problems they've got to solve there. Because certainly I think they do play it safe on things like death and stuff. And I'm not sure whether they're going to have the balls to make anything stick. If they do that, and I've certainly heard rumours of certain things, I've read sort of contradictory rumours, but I suspect one of them will be true. Then we'll see. But, you know, in 2008, The Dark Knight was the superhero film for the ages, the classic. That's probably true as a one-off film. But in terms of influence, this was the sleeper hit that would actually change the world. And all of the cocked-up attempts at, you know, shared universes. I think even things like Disney buying Star Wars and attempting to bring that back at a film a year and broaden it out. All of these things owe something to Marvel, and as such, it couldn't have existed without Iron Man. So highest of high praise.
No, I totally agree. Really, it was the superhero film for that era. I can't believe as amazed I am at the Bond series running for over 50 years. I just think it's in today's society, today's climate, it's still amazing that Marvel, picked to, after all its troubles that it went through, picked 2008 as right. Okay, this is the year that we're going to kick off this series, and lo and behold, 10 years later, the MCU has turned into this massive behemoth. It just keeps pumping out hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. But no, I think, little did we know it would all kick off this epic movie series. And here we are 10 years later. But yeah, it was definitely the right film for that era. And hey, we would not be here doing this podcast without it.
Yeah, I just figured out, 2008 was the same year as Mamma Mia. I had no idea Mamma Mia was that old.
And 10 years later,
it's not as influential as Mamma Mia, obviously.
Well, of course not, because,
would we have had
10 years later, so.
Boston singing SOS, I mean, how fucking...
Yeah.
Oh, God, bros. Oh, Jesus. Well, I have to go see that as well. But, yeah.
Here's the thing, in the new Mamma Mia, are they just going to sing the same songs, or are they going to...
They're going to do some more songs, aren't they? More songs from our back catalogue.
Have they not overplayed all the back catalogue?
Well, I guess Becca will find out for us.
Okay.
Yeah,
thanks, Becca.
I've got a friend of mine.
Not coming in summer review part 2.
No.
Maybe,
I'm
going to refuse to see it. I'm not going to make
it with a
myself.
friend of mine.
Maybe unless we get Becca on.
Oh God.
Yeah,
that's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. Yeah, she's too shy to do a podcast.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I kind of echo the same sort of terms here with Iron Man. I had the similar sort of feeling of every scene had its purpose, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about films is just tightness and efficiency, and it has a real charm and charisma about it, and it's a very easy watch. Certainly doesn't have a big wow factor, understandably, but there's a really nice element of charm, almost like a little bit of Rocketeer to it. I don't know if any of you guys.
Yeah, definitely.
I still haven't seen it. It's I'll get.
You gotta check it. It was on Netflix, but it's not anymore. I don't think, sadly. But you gotta check it out.
But I haven't
Tim
got
Burton as the villain in this.
But every
I can't place, but it's amazing.
I wouldn't say every few episodes, but it has been brought up a few times on podcast now, and I keep having to say I'm sorry I still haven't seen it. I will do.
Yeah. It's a really charming movie, but yeah.
I think I know what I'd be getting with it, and I like the idea. When it came out, I didn't want to see it. I was about 13 at the time. Didn't want to see it. But now I think I'd enjoy it, but I haven't got to it yet.
But yeah, Iron Man, really, really decent film. And I almost think it's almost like almost forgotten to a degree, because I think with all the other Avengers films, it kind of gets pushed aside. Yeah, well, Iron Man started it all, but we're up to this level. I think there's a little element of like, well, we don't really appreciate actually how good the first one actually is, especially with Iron Man 2, which may have tarnished it. Some people say it's not that bad. I don't know. I'm kind of 50-50 on it, but we'll see. But yeah, I generally have really admiration for this film.
Would you admire it more if you knew more about it?
Well, I do like a bit more. I do like knowledge on it. I mean, I've seen it and reviewed it and everything, but I don't feel I knew too much about it.
I think it's a fortunate thing that we have a part of our format here where Becca educates us and makes us better people. Becca,
I don't know about that.
give us some marvelous facts.
Oh,
Pun Central. Oh my god. Yeah, it's get kind of more interesting, I guess, as they go on.
And make sure to go because I don't want to end on a downy.
Damn it, I was just getting there. Damn it. Oh my god. Okay, fun fact number 1. Avi Arad has 2 credits on the IMDb in this film as producer and executive producer. Fun fact number 2. Hugh Jackman was originally offered the role of Tony Stark. Imagine that, could have Stark and Wolverine. Legend.
Has anyone... I was going to say, has anyone ever done that? Because Ryan Reynolds, Green Lantern and Daredevil.
Yeah, definitely. So
Chris Evans, if you're talking about between
the
two
different...
Human Torch and...
Yeah. And there are others as well. There's a few that have appeared in both.
It's cool. Not so fun. This is Stan Winston's last film.
Oh, Thanos as well,
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, that was the other one I was thinking of. I couldn't think of the name. Yeah, Josh Brolin. 2 this year. Both sides of the fence this year. Stan Winston's last film. Yeah, he's in all the special features.
Not so fun facts.
Looking reasonably well. I mean, I think he had like a leukemia or something.
Yeah, it was very sad.
He died in like the June or July, and the film came out in May. So all the special features interviewing him are probably 2007 as they're filming, because they used Stan Winston Studios for all the like models and animatronics. So the design of the outfit and all the rest of it was worked out with Stan Winston.
Also, you mentioned this in the review yourself, but obviously, fun fact number 4, near the end of the film, Stark tells Rhodey to keep the skies clear, obviously, to which he replies, "Oh, next time, baby." He just takes a quick glance at the Silver Mark II, but sadly, the actor who follows him will get the chance to do this.
Yeah, not Terrence Howard.
No, sadly not Terrence Howard. Fun fact number 5, my last fun fact of the evening, Jon Favreau chose ILM to provide the visual effects after watching Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End and Transformers. Now, I really... These are 2 series which I've seen the first couple of Transformers films, but I personally... for moral reasons, I won't go and see the rest of them. But like
moral reasons, what?
Moral reasons. Why not?
Of Michael Bay being a tit.
To be fair, the effects work ain't the problem, though. They look good.
Yeah, precisely. This is what I'm going to say about Pirates of the Caribbean. The first one is good fun, but the rest of them are a little bit questionable. But the effects are absolutely stunning. Yeah. They look amazing.
To be fair, with what we're going to get next week, where they use the smaller studio, use ILM. Because ILM currently make, the Ruffalo Hulk and do most of the work for them. They use Rhythm and Hues next week, and it's all the worse for it.
I mean, they're okay, but I kind of think they weren't the right... I can't speak now, sorry. They weren't the right... fuck off. They were a cheap... I think the problem is they were a cheap company, simple as that. Yeah, cut that bit out.
ILM... Leave me dead. ILM, Weta, you know what you're getting. Again, you've still got to be on the pecking order, because it's quality control really, because everyone works on everything, and there's a lot of subcontracting and stuff going on. But if you compare ILM's work to Rhythm and Hues, then I think I'm quite happy that they stayed with them.
And that's our fun facts.
Okay, social media, folks.
Oh, okay, yeah, so you can find me at Cinematronics on Twitter, and you can find all our old podcasts, which aren't on iTunes, because iTunes are bunch of twats, favouring other bigger podcasts. let their older podcasts be in it. But you can still find all our old stuff at soundtracks.co.uk. Should we plug Patreon, or should we do that later?
Right, yeah. You tell us where Patreon is, then I'll tell you where you can find me, and we'll talk a little bit about Patreon.
Yeah, I think you can find it on Patreon, Expect Us to Talk. If not, you can just Google it if you're unsure. But
we'll put a link on our social media pages once we finalised it.
Yes.
Okay. You can find me at the Pasty Kid 1976. Right, yes, Patreon. We still haven't finalised this, but we wanted to give you a bit more information, just simply because in the last episode we were talking about what ifs and maybes. This was on the Man with the Golden Gun commentary. We were talking about what we would or wouldn't charge, and we've had a little bit of feedback, and we've thought about offers we have been made. We've got our first commission, and we won't announce it yet, but we've got our first commission for the autumn. For a particular film at a certain rate, which we've accepted. So what we're going to say is a full review, i.e. the film, the special features, and a review like you've heard tonight will be $100 on Patreon. A commentary will be half that, 50, because all we got to do is watch the film. We've still got to edit it and all the rest of it, but all we got to do is find a copy then. It's priced slightly high because we don't want to do a lot of them. Simple as that. If we said it was $10, we could be swamped with them, to be quite honest. We've only got time to do a few, so they're supposed to be relatively rare and a special treat for somebody that they really, really want to see a specific film. So it's deliberately priced fairly high. So if you're in the UK, obviously you've got to think about exchange rates as well. It's $100 US. It's going to be set on the site, and $50 for a commentary. The point we just want to make, though, is when you go and buy these, just think two things. Those are guide prices, and what I mean by that is you'd have to pay us a lot more to do certain films. Like, I'm not doing the Human Centipede for $100 because
I'm not doing the Human Centipede. Period.
Well, there you go. So you'd have to make a massive donation to even make Becca even think about it. So what I would say is two things. Talk to us first. So you can't just put $100 on the site and say, right, that's for this film. We have to say yes to it first through one of our official accounts. So you need to approach us via email, Twitter, Facebook, something like that. Ask us there, and you will get a reply from one of those accounts, and we'll agree the price. Not only that, you may want us to do 2 back-to-back films in one episode. If we weren't a Bond podcast and we're never going to do Bond, the example would be Casino and Quantum. Well, we probably wouldn't charge you $200 to do 2 in one. So things like that. Second point we want to make is obvious but needs thinking about is you might come to us and say, such and such is my absolute favourite film. Can you do it? Just be aware you don't buy our opinion, you buy our time. So you may spend $100 to ask us to do your favourite film, and then all three of us absolutely slaughter it. So that is possible. So we make no promises on length of show. We may do a show and it comes out at 1 hour and 30 or 1 hour and 35 and shorter than average. You may ask for a commentary. We go off topic a lot. We're not going to promise not to do that. What we're promising is to approach that type of show the same way we approach any show. We do. But we can't promise you our opinion will match what you match. We can't promise that we're going to say everything you'd want us to say about a film, and we can't promise we'd agree with your opinions. That's all I really wanted to say on it. That doesn't stop you making smaller donations here and there as and when you feel like. But yeah, $100 for a full, proper film review, $50 for a commentary, but get it approved with us first. Otherwise, we've got the right to just say thanks for the donation, because we have to agree that we're going to do it.
Yeah, otherwise, and obviously this is separate to our charity requests that we get from time to time. Obviously, we've done one for the previous donation, the charity drive that we did.
Yeah, and we're talking comparable sums of money. And in fact, the price we've just quoted you for a commentary is cheaper, significantly cheaper than we took for that commentary episode. So I think we're being fair with the amount of work that goes into it. It takes 2 to 3 hours to record. It takes similar to watch the film. It takes about twice as long to edit. Then you're talking special features and everything else. And that's in and amongst other podcasts we record and other things we appear on. So it's, overall, you're talking 20, 30 hours of our time in total, the three of us individually added together. So we don't think that's unfair. If you think of it in wage terms, we're not being paid a lot for it. But quite simply, we can't be doing like 15 of these. They need to be an occasional thing for extraordinary donations once in a while.
Yeah, because a film or a series that perhaps we wouldn't ordinarily cover, for example, or perhaps we didn't think of covering.
It's another reason. It's another reason to talk to us because, like I say,
no Human Centipede.
Yeah, exactly that. We may
or anything that's like too far.
I hate to tell Becca what the next series is after Marvel.
I quit. Or anything that's really
things like that. We reserve the right to say no. We just may not want to do it, so talk to us first. But obviously, we'll be positively disposed. But I don't think certainly two of the three of us aren't massive horror fans. For example, we don't want to watch anything. Where you pick a show because you just think it would be funny to put us through that. Think twice because
it's because of the nature of it. That's all. But exactly. I mean, things like what was it, Pink Flamingos, or anything from the John Waters stable.
Yeah, I don't want to watch that.
I mean, it's kind of. It has gross moments of it, but it's because he is, he's basically trying to push the boundaries of what's acceptable and not. Whereas Human Centipede is just unacceptable.
Yeah,
so there's no pushing boundaries about it. It's just unacceptable.
You can always ask. That's all we're saying.
I know, probably won't watch it, but you guys go ahead, fill your boots.
No, that's not going to happen. It's three of us or none of us. As simple as that. So all three of us have to agree. I think it will be the three of us, as in, because we can't take donations and then ask Charlie to come on completely for free, and then it changes the whole fee structure. So that's going to confuse matters. So I think in Patreon you're buying the three of us, but like I say, we have to agree to it first. And if it's something, we won't just take your money. If we've got like a rough outline of some of the series we're going to do, if you come and ask us for a certain film and it's on the list, we'll say, don't worry, you'll get it for free in a couple of years. Whatever. That's all I wanted to say on the Patreon. But more to come when we figured the rest out. That's just the headlines.
Yeah, we're still working out the main details.
Yeah.
Yeah, but by all means, if if you want to just throw us like a few quid, you can do that on Patreon. That's absolutely fine.
But always don't feel you have to.
Yeah, don't feel obliged. We're not a charity.
You're not lesser if you just listen to this show, because we listen to plenty of shows, or I certainly do, where they talk about donations, and I don't give any money, and I've listened to them for years.
Well, exactly, it's the same. Yeah, with another well-known podcast that asks for donations. But yeah, likewise, there's no obligation. They also have a shop, which is another way to do it. We don't have a shop, but there we are. But as I say, people who listen to us don't listen to anything. All of a sudden charging.
Would anyone really buy a T-shirt with "Starring Edward Snowden" written on it?
If you would buy this T-shirt, please drop us an email. eccentrictalk@gmail.com. Please let us know. Yeah. We'll do a poll.
All right. Okay, folks.
Let's do this poll.
I think that's it, isn't it? Becca, have you said where we can be found? No, you haven't yet, have you? Becca,
at last, we can be found back on Twitter at Expect Us to Talk. At long bloody last.
What, really?
Yeah, it's been up and running a day or two now.
Oh, bloody hell.
I was chasing them for days. I
did say on our thread, Chris, it is there.
All right, well,
we're back up and running now.
I've been asleep. Leave me alone.
I even tweeted Jack Dorsey. Come on, sort it out, Jack.
Yes.
But yes, you can find us on Twitter at Expect Us to Talk. You can email us at expectustotalk@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook.com/Do You Expect Us to Talk. You can also be finding us on the YouTube. If you type in "Do You Expect Us to Talk," you can find us on there. And also on iTunes, if you can give us a lovely 5-star review, help us rank higher and get more listeners. Thank you. And Stitcher as well. We're also on the Stitcher and Podbean. You can find us on there from time to time. We're not officially on there, but we appear on there. And that's it. Yes, I do not on Grindr, and they're like
Grindr.
Because we'll
she keeps mentioning Grindr. I think Becca's desperate to date some gay men, you know.
Or Tinder is what I meant to say.
Oh, okay.
Keep swiping the right way.
Okay.
I don't use any of those online dating sites, literally. I tried Plenty of Fish a few years ago. Disaster, so I'm just going to go back to the traditional methods.
She dated a herring.
I stuck him a clipper. Stuck him a clipper back for breakfast.
All right. I think the best way to go from here is to a completely forgotten and irrelevant corner of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which means, Becca,
Do You Expect to Talk will return with The Incredible Hulk.